The dust devils dancing across the parched Texas soil seemed to mock Martha Everett as she stood on the porch of her weathered ranch house, clutching the final notice from the bank that would seal her fate in 3 days' time. The August sun of 1878 beat down mercilessly on the small homestead outside Trinity, Texas, turning everything it touched into shades of brown and gold. As if the land itself knew, it was slipping through her fingers like sand through an hourglass. Martha was only 24 years old, but the last year had aged her in ways that went beyond counting. Her husband Samuel had been dead for 11 months now, trampled by a spooked horse during a routine cattle drive. One moment she had been a newlywed with dreams of building something lasting, and the next she was a widow drowning in debts she had not even known existed. Samuel had borrowed heavily to expand their herd, to buy better breeding stock, to sink a new well. All those investments now felt like millstones around her neck, pulling her down into an abyss of financial ruin. The letter in her hand stated it plainly enough. $2,347. That was what she owed the Trinity Bank and Trust, and if she could not produce that sum by Friday at noon, the sheriff would come with papers to take possession of the land. Her land. Samuel's land. The 160 acres that represented every dream they had shared during their brief marriage. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the pocket of her worn calico dress, then turned to survey the property that had consumed so much of her life. The barn needed repairs she could not afford. The corral fence sagged in places where posts had rotted through. The vegetable garden she had tried to maintain was struggling in the heat despite her daily efforts to haul water from the creek. Everything spoke of slow decline, of a battle being lost one day at a time. Martha had tried everything she could think of to raise the money. She had sold off most of the cattle, keeping only 3 milk cows and a handful of chickens. She had sold her wedding ring, her mother's silver candlesticks, even Samuel's pocket watch that she had treasured as a keepsake. She had taken in mending and washing from the women in town, working her fingers raw until they bled. She had baked pies and sold them at the general store. None of it had been enough. The debt was simply too large and time had run out. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her dark thoughts. She shaded her eyes against the sun and watched as a lone rider approached along the dusty road that led from town. He sat tall in the saddle, moving with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun, a faded blue shirt, and leather chaps that had seen hard use. A bedroll was tied behind his saddle, and she could see the stock of a rifle protruding from a scabbard. Martha felt a flutter of nervousness. She was alone out here, and while Trinity was generally a peaceful town, a woman by herself was vulnerable in ways that made her cautious around strangers. She stepped back toward the door, where Samuel's shotgun rested just inside. The rider must have sensed her wariness because he reined in his horse well short of the porch and called out in a clear, respectful voice. "Good afternoon, madam. I am sorry to trouble you. I am looking for the Everett place. Would this be it?" His accent held the soft drawl of Texas mixed with something else she could not quite place. Mexican, perhaps, or Spanish. His face, what she could see of it beneath the hat brim, was sun-bronzed and handsome in a rough-hewn way. He looked to be in his late 20s, with several days' worth of dark stubble on his jaw. "This is the Everett place," Martha replied, keeping her voice neutral. "I am Martha Everett. What is your business here?" The stranger dismounted with fluid ease and removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that was slightly too long and in need of a trim. His eyes were a striking shade of green that seemed almost startling against his tanned skin. My name is Preston Hunt, madam. I am looking for work, and I heard in town that you might have need of a ranch hand. Martha almost laughed at the bitter irony of it. A ranch hand, as if she could afford to pay anyone when she could not even pay the bank. I am afraid you heard wrong, Mr. Hunt. I have no work to offer. I am sorry you rode all the way out here for nothing. Preston Hunt studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that those green eyes saw far more than she wanted to reveal. Forgive me, madam, but this place looks like it could use some help. I am a hard worker and I am not particular about wages. I would work for meals and a place to sleep in the barn. That is all I am asking. Why would you do that? Martha asked suspiciously. Men did not work for nothing, not in her experience. There was always an angle, always something they wanted. Because I need a place to stay for a while, and I would rather earn my keep than be beholden, Preston said simply. And because I can see that you are in a difficult situation. I know what it is like to struggle, madam. I have been there myself more times than I care to count. Martha wanted to accept. God knew she needed help, needed someone strong to repair the fence and patch the barn roof, and do all the heavy work that was beyond her strength alone. But what was the point when she would lose everything in 3 days anyway? It seemed cruel to let this man work for her under false pretenses. Mr. Hunt, I appreciate the offer, but I need to be honest with you. In 3 days, this ranch will no longer be mine. The bank is foreclosing. So you see, there really is no point. She expected him to tip his hat, mount his horse, and ride away. Instead, Preston Hunt's expression grew thoughtful. How much do you owe? The question was blunt, almost improper, but Martha was too tired and defeated to take offense. $2,347. More money than I could earn in 10 years, let alone 3 days. Preston nodded slowly, as if she had just confirmed something he had already suspected. He looked around at the property again, his gaze taking in every detail. This is good land. Good water from what I can see. The house is solid, just needs some work. It would be a shame to let the bank have it. I agree, Mr. Hunt, but I do not have much choice in the matter. Martha heard the bitterness in her own voice and hated it. She had never been a bitter person before Samuel died, but grief and hardship had changed her in ways she was still discovering. Preston was quiet for several heartbeats. Then he said something that made Martha's heart skip. What if someone paid your debt? What would you do then? Martha stared at him, wondering if the heat had addled his brain. Mr. Hunt, I just told you the amount. No one has that kind of money to spare, and even if they did, why would they give it to a stranger? Not give, madam. Lend. Preston's green eyes held her steadily. Or invest. I have been working cattle drives for 10 years, saving every penny. I have been looking for a place to settle down, to put down roots. This place could be that for me. Martha felt a surge of hope, so intense it was almost painful, followed immediately by crushing disappointment. You want to buy the ranch from me. I understand. But Mr. Hunt, even if you paid off the bank, I would still be in debt to you, and I have no way to repay such a sum. I would be trading one creditor for another. That is not what I am proposing, Preston said quietly. He took a step closer, then seemed to think better of it and stayed where he was. Mrs. Everett, I realize this is sudden and we are strangers to each other. But hear me out. I will pay your debt to the bank, all of it. In return, I am asking you to consider a partnership, a marriage. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Martha gripped the porch railing to steady herself. You are asking me to marry you. We have known each other for all of 5 minutes. I know how it sounds, Preston said, and for the first time she heard a note of uncertainty in his voice. But think about it practically, madam. You need money to save your land. I have money but no land. Together we could make this ranch work. I am a hard worker and I know cattle and horses. You know this land and how to run a household. It makes sense. Marriage is not a business arrangement, Mr. Hunt. Martha could hear her voice rising, fueled by a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been fear. Marriage is supposed to be about love and partnership and building a life together because you want to, not because one person is desperate and the other sees an opportunity. Preston's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. I agree with you, madam. But sometimes life does not give us ideal circumstances. Sometimes we have to make the best of what we have. I am not asking you to love me. I am asking you to let me help you save your home, and in return, to give me a chance to prove that I am a decent man worthy of your trust. If after a year you are unhappy, you can have the ranch free and clear and I will move on. That is my offer. Martha's mind was racing. It was insane. Absolutely insane. She did not know this man from Adam. He could be a criminal, a con artist, someone with dark secrets and terrible intentions. And yet, as she looked into those steady green eyes, she did not see deception. She saw earnestness and something that looked like hope. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for a stranger? Preston was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but clear. Because I know what it is like to lose everything, Mrs. Everett. I know what it is like to feel helpless and alone. And because when I rode up and saw you standing there, looking so determined and brave even though your world is falling apart, I thought to myself that here was someone worth taking a chance on. I am not a fancy man with pretty words, but I am honest, I work hard, and I keep my promises. That is all I can offer you, along with the money to save your land. Martha felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She had not cried when Samuel died, had not let herself break down even once during the terrible months that followed. But somehow this stranger's unexpected kindness was threatening to crack the walls she had built around her heart. This is crazy, she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew she was going to say yes. What choice did she have? It was either accept this bizarre proposal or lose everything. At least this way she had a chance. At least this way she could keep the land Samuel had loved, could honor his memory by making the ranch succeed. I need time to think. You have until Friday, Preston reminded her gently. I understand this is not an easy decision. But Mrs. Everett, I need you to know that I am sincere in my offer. I am not looking to take advantage of you. I want a home and a chance at a real life. If you can give me that, I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret it. He put his hat back on and moved toward his horse. Martha felt a sudden panic, as if letting him leave would mean letting her last chance slip away. Wait, where are you going? Into town to find a place to stay, Preston said. I will be at the boarding house on Main Street if you want to find me. Take your time, think it over. If you decide yes, come to town before Friday at noon and we will go to the bank together. If you decide no, I will understand and wish you well. He swung up into the saddle with that same easy grace she had noticed before. For a moment he just sat there, looking down at her, and Martha thought she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not pity, exactly, but compassion and understanding. Mr. Hunt, she called as he turned his horse. If I were to say yes, and if we were to do this, I would want it to be a real marriage. Not in the beginning, I understand that we are strangers, but eventually. I will not spend my life in a marriage of convenience only. I have already lost one husband I loved. I could not bear to live with someone I felt nothing for. Preston nodded slowly. I would want that too, madam. I am not interested in a business arrangement for life. I am interested in building something real if we can. Then he touched the brim of his hat and rode away, leaving Martha alone with her thoughts and the weight of an impossible decision. She spent the rest of that day in a fog of confusion and anxiety. She tried to do her evening chores, feeding the chickens and milking the cows, but her mind kept circling back to Preston Hunt and his extraordinary offer. Part of her insisted it was too good to be true, that there had to be some catch, some hidden agenda. But another part, the part that was weary of fighting alone, wanted desperately to believe that someone might help her out of pure kindness. That night, Martha lay awake in the bed she had shared with Samuel, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with her decision. She thought about Samuel and the love they had shared, brief as it had been. They had married when she was 22 and he was 25, both of them eager to start building a life together. He had been her first love, her only love, and losing him had nearly destroyed her. Could she really marry someone else? A stranger? It felt like a betrayal of Samuel's memory, even though intellectually she knew that was foolish. Samuel was gone, and he would not want her to lose their land because she was too proud or sentimental to accept help when it was offered. But more than that, Martha had to admit to herself that Preston Hunt had sparked something in her, some tiny flicker of interest that surprised her. He was handsome, certainly, but it was more than that. It was the quiet strength in his manner, the respectful way he had spoken to her, the lack of presumption in his offer despite its boldness. He had looked at her and seen someone worth helping, not just a desperate widow to be pitied or taken advantage of. By the time dawn broke on Thursday morning, Martha had made her decision. She dressed in her best remaining dress, a dark blue cotton that was faded but clean and mended. She braided her long brown hair and pinned it up, then hitched her horse to the small wagon. The ride into Trinity took just over an hour, and with every passing mile, Martha's nervousness grew. Trinity was a modest town of perhaps 500 people, built along the banks of the Trinity River that gave it its name. There was a main street with a bank, a general store, a saloon, a church, and various other businesses. The boarding house was a 2-story white building at the far end of the street, run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson who was known for keeping a respectable establishment. Martha tied her horse to the hitching post outside and stood for a moment, gathering her courage. This was it. Once she walked through that door and found Preston Hunt, there would be no turning back. She would be committing herself to a path she could never have imagined 2 days ago. She climbed the steps and knocked on the door. Mrs. Patterson answered, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a welcoming smile. "Martha Everett, what a pleasant surprise. Come in, dear. What brings you to town?" "I am looking for one of your guests, Mrs. Patterson, a Mr. Preston Hunt." "Is he here?" Something in Martha's tone must have conveyed the urgency of her errand because Mrs. Patterson's smile faded into a look of concern. "He is in the dining room having breakfast. Is everything all right?" "I hope so," Martha said honestly. "May I see him?" "Of course, dear." "Right this way." Mrs. Patterson led her through the entry hall to the dining room, where several guests were seated at a long table eating eggs and biscuits. Preston Hunt was at the far end, and he looked up when Martha entered. His eyes widened slightly in surprise, and he immediately stood, setting down his napkin. "Mrs. Everett," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." Martha was aware of the curious stares of the other boarders, and she felt her cheeks flush. "Mr. Hunt, might I have a word with you in private?" "Of course." He crossed the room quickly and followed her out into the hallway. They stood facing each other, and Martha could see the question in his eyes, the careful hope he was trying not to show. "I have thought about your offer," Martha began, her voice sounding steadier than she felt. "And I have decided to accept. If you are still willing, I will marry you." The transformation in Preston's face was subtle but unmistakable. Relief, joy, and something deeper flickered across his features before he schooled them back into calmness. "I am still willing, Mrs. Everett. More than willing. You will not regret this, I promise you. I am trusting you, Mr. Hunt, Martha said quietly. Please do not make me sorry for it. I will not, he said firmly. What happens now? I suppose we need to go to the bank and take care of the debt, and then we need to find someone to marry us before Friday. Preston nodded. The bank first. Let me settle my bill here and get my things. Within half an hour, they were walking together down the main street of Trinity toward the bank. Martha was acutely aware of the attention they were drawing. Trinity was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the sight of the Everett widow walking with a strange man was bound to set tongues wagging. She held her head high and tried to ignore the stares. The Trinity Bank and Trust was a solid brick building that tried to project an air of prosperity and permanence. The bank president, Mr. Cyrus Thornton, was a florid-faced man in his 50s who had been decidedly unsympathetic to Martha's pleas for more time. When she and Preston walked into his office, Thornton looked up with obvious surprise. Mrs. Everett, I did not expect to see you until tomorrow. Have you come to discuss the foreclosure proceedings? No, Mr. Thornton, Martha said, taking a small satisfaction in the coolness of her own voice. I've come to pay my debt. Thornton's eyebrows rose. You have the money. I do, Preston said, stepping forward. He pulled a worn leather pouch from inside his jacket and set it on Thornton's desk with a heavy thunk. There should be $2,500 there, enough to cover Mrs. Everett's debt and all associated fees. Thornton opened the pouch and stared at the stack of bills inside. His face went through a series of interesting expressions, from shock to calculation to barely concealed disappointment. Martha realized with a flash of anger that Thornton had been looking forward to foreclosing on her land, probably already had a buyer lined up who would pay him a commission. I see, Thornton said slowly. And who might you be, sir? Preston Hunt. I am Mrs. Everett's fiancé. We will be married tomorrow. If Thornton's eyebrows had risen before, they nearly disappeared into his hairline now. His gaze shifted between Preston and Martha, clearly trying to piece together this unexpected development. I see. How very sudden. I had not heard that you were courting Mrs. Everett. My personal life is not your concern, Mr. Thornton, Martha said coldly. Will you accept payment or not? Of course, of course. Thornton began counting out the money with meticulous care. When he was satisfied that the full amount was present, he unlocked a drawer in his desk and produced the mortgage documents. I will need to prepare the paperwork showing that the debt has been paid in full. It will take a few minutes. They waited in uncomfortable silence while Thornton scratched away with his pen, preparing receipts and marking the mortgage as satisfied. Finally, he blotted the ink and handed the papers to Martha. There you are, Mrs. Everett. Your debt is cleared. The ranch is yours free and clear. Martha took the papers with trembling hands. Just like that, the weight that had been crushing her for months was lifted. She was free. The land was safe. She had to blink back tears as the reality of it washed over her. Thank you, Mr. Thornton, she managed to say. Thank your fiancé, Thornton replied dryly. He is the one who saved your land. Outside the bank, Martha stood in the bright sunlight and took a deep, shaky breath. She looked down at the papers in her hands, then up at Preston Hunt, who was watching her with those steady green eyes. Thank you, she said softly. I do not know how I can ever repay you. You do not need to repay me, Preston said. We are going to be partners. Your success is my success now. Still, I want you to know that I am grateful. I was prepared to lose everything. You gave me back my home, my future. That is not a small thing. Preston smiled, and Martha realized it was the first time she had seen him truly smile. It transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. You are welcome, Mrs. Everett. Now, shall we go find someone to marry us? They went to the church, a small white building with a tall steeple at the edge of town. Reverend Michaels was a young man, probably not yet 30, with earnest brown eyes and a serious demeanor. When Martha explained what they wanted, he looked troubled. "Mrs. Everett, I must confess I am surprised. Your husband has not been gone a year. Are you certain you are ready to remarry so soon?" Martha felt a flash of resentment at having to justify her decision, but she understood that the Reverend was only concerned for her well-being. "Reverend Michaels, I appreciate your concern, but I am in a difficult situation and Mr. Hunt has been kind enough to help me. I understand that this may seem sudden, but I am making this decision with a clear mind and of my own free will." The Reverend turned to Preston. "And you, Mr. Hunt? What are your intentions toward Mrs. Everett?" "My intentions are honorable, sir," Preston said firmly. "I want to build a life with her, to help her make her ranch successful, and to be a good husband to her. I know we are not marrying for love, at least not yet. But I believe that love can grow between two people who respect each other and work together toward common goals." Reverend Michaels studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. "Very well. I will perform the ceremony tomorrow morning after the regular service. Will you have witnesses?" "I will ask Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house," Preston said. "She seems like a kind woman." "And I will ask Sarah Whitman," Martha added. Sarah was one of the few friends she had left in town, a woman near her own age who had never judged her for her misfortune. "She will stand up with me." "Then I will see you both tomorrow at 11 o'clock, the Reverend said. "May God bless your union." Walking back to where Martha had left her wagon, Preston said quietly, "You do not have to do this if you have changed your mind. The debt is paid regardless. The land is safe." Martha stopped walking and turned to face him. "Are you having second thoughts, Mr. Hunt?" "No," he said immediately. "But I want to make sure you are doing this because you want to, not just because you feel obligated." Martha considered the question seriously. Was she having second thoughts? Yes and no. She was terrified, certainly. She was about to marry a man she barely knew to let him into her home and her life. But beneath the fear was something else, something that felt almost like anticipation. "I am doing this because I believe it is the right decision," she said finally. "For both of us. You saved my home, Mr. Hunt, but more than that, you treated me with respect and kindness when you had no reason to. That means something to me. I think we can make this work if we are both willing to try." Preston's expression softened. "Then I will see you tomorrow at the church, Mrs. Everett. In the meantime, is it all right if I ride out to the ranch this afternoon and start on some of those repairs? I have the rest of my savings, enough to buy materials. I might as well make myself useful." "You do not have to do that," Martha protested. "You have already done so much." "I want to," Preston said simply. "It is going to be my home too after tomorrow. I want it to be in good shape." Martha found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "All right then. Thank you, Mr. Hunt." "Preston," he said, "if we are going to be married, you should probably call me Preston." "Preston," Martha repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "And you should call me Martha." "Martha," he said, and the way he said her name, soft and respectful, made something flutter in her chest. She climbed into her wagon and drove home, her mind whirling with everything that had happened. In the space of one day, her entire life had changed direction. Tomorrow she would be married again, to a man she had met only yesterday. It was insane and reckless and completely unlike her usual cautious nature. But as she drove up to the ranch house and saw Preston Hunt already there, unloading lumber from a wagon he must have purchased in town, she felt a sense of rightness that surprised her. He looked up as she approached, shading his eyes against the sun, and waved. Martha waved back, and for the first time in months she felt something that might have been hope. Preston worked on the ranch for the rest of that day and well into the evening. Martha brought him water and sandwiches at midday, and they ate together on the porch, making awkward small talk. She learned that he had been born in San Antonio, the son of a Mexican mother and an American father. His parents had died when he was young, and he had been working cattle drives since he was 16 years old. He had no family left, no ties to any particular place, which was why he was looking to settle down and build a new life. In turn, Martha told him about growing up in Trinity, about marrying Samuel and their dreams for the ranch, about the accident that had killed her husband and left her alone. It was painful to talk about, but Preston listened without interrupting, and there was such genuine sympathy in his eyes that Martha found it easier than she expected. "He sounds like he was a good man," Preston said when she finished. "I am sorry you lost him." "He was," Martha agreed. "And I am sorry too. But I have learned that life does not always give us what we want or what we think we deserve. We just have to make the best of what we have." "That is a wise way to look at it," Preston said. As the sun began to set, Preston gathered his tools and prepared to head back to town. "I will see you tomorrow at the church," he said, swinging up onto his horse. "Tomorrow," Martha echoed. She watched him ride away, then went inside and locked the door. Tomorrow she would be a married woman again. Tomorrow her life would change in ways she could not yet imagine. She sent up a prayer that she was making the right choice, that this strange arrangement would somehow work out for the best. She barely slept that night, and when morning came, she rose with the sun and began preparing herself. She had no wedding dress, but she had one good dress that she had been saving for special occasions, a deep green cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. It brought out the color of her eyes, which were a light hazel that sometimes looked green and sometimes looked brown depending on the light. She washed her hair and dried it in the sun, then arranged it in an elaborate updo that took her 3 tries to get right. She pinched her cheeks to bring color to them and bit her lips to make them redder. When she looked at herself in the small mirror over her dresser, she saw a woman who looked nervous and uncertain but also determined. That would have to be enough. The drive to town seemed both too long and too short. When she arrived at the church, she saw Preston's horse already tied outside. Her heart began to beat faster, and she had to take several deep breaths to calm herself before going inside. The church was cool and dim after the bright sunshine outside. Preston was standing at the front with Reverend Michaels, wearing what were clearly his best clothes: a clean white shirt, dark pants, a vest, and a string tie. He had shaved and trimmed his hair, and Martha was struck anew by how handsome he was. Sarah Whitman was already there, seated in the front pew. She jumped up when she saw Martha and hurried over, her round face creased with concern. "Martha, is this really what you want? You do not have to go through with this if you are having doubts." "I am sure, Sarah," Martha said, squeezing her friend's hand. "I know it seems sudden, but this is the right thing for me. I need you to trust me." Sarah looked skeptical but nodded. "All right. But if he turns out to be a scoundrel, I am going to say I told you so." Martha managed a shaky laugh. "Fair enough." Mrs. Patterson arrived a few minutes later, and then there was nothing left to delay. Martha walked down the short aisle on trembling legs, acutely aware that this was nothing like her first wedding. Then, the church had been full of friends and family, and she had been radiant with joy and excitement. Now there were only 4 witnesses, and instead of joy, she felt mostly anxiety and hope mixed in equal measure. But when she reached the front, and Preston turned to look at her, his eyes filled with such warmth and admiration that some of her anxiety faded. He offered her his hand, and she took it, feeling the calluses on his palm and the strength in his grip. "You look beautiful," he whispered, and Martha felt her cheeks warm. Reverend Michaels cleared his throat and began the ceremony. Martha barely heard the words. She was too focused on Preston's face, on his eyes that never left hers, on the way his thumb gently stroked the back of her hand as if to reassure her. When it came time for the vows, Preston's voice was strong and clear. I, Preston Hunt, take you, Martha Everett, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to honor you, protect you, and provide for you for as long as we both shall live. Then it was Martha's turn, and she was surprised to find her own voice steady. I, Martha Everett, take you, Preston Hunt, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to honor you, stand by you, and build a life with you for as long as we both shall live. Do you have rings? The Reverend asked. Martha shook her head. She had sold her wedding ring from Samuel months ago, and they had not thought to buy new ones. But Preston reached into his vest pocket and pulled out 2 simple gold bands. I picked these up yesterday, he said quietly. I hope you do not mind. Martha stared at the rings, feeling her eyes prickle with unexpected tears. It was such a thoughtful gesture, so much more than she had expected. Preston slipped one of the rings onto her finger, and then she took the other and slid it onto his hand. Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Michaels said. You may kiss your bride. Preston hesitated for just a moment, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Martha made the decision for him, rising up on her toes and pressing a soft, brief kiss to his lips. It was chaste and proper, nothing like the passionate kiss she had shared with Samuel on their wedding day. But it was sweet, and when she pulled back, she saw something in Preston's eyes that made her breath catch. They signed the marriage certificate, with Sarah and Mrs. Patterson as witnesses. Then they were walking back down the aisle, and Martha realized with a jolt that she was now Martha Hunt. It felt strange and new and a little frightening. Outside the church, Sarah hugged her tightly. I hope you will be happy, she whispered. You deserve happiness, Martha. Thank you, Martha whispered back, for everything, for being here, for supporting me, Mrs. Patterson also offered her congratulations, along with a knowing look that suggested she understood more than she was saying. Then it was just Martha and Preston, standing beside her wagon in the bright August sunlight, newlyweds who were still virtual strangers. I suppose we should head back to the ranch, Martha said, feeling suddenly shy. I suppose we should, Preston agreed. I will follow you on my horse. The ride back to the ranch was surreal. Martha kept glancing at the gold band on her finger, still unable to quite believe what she had done. She had married Preston Hunt. He was her husband now, for better or worse. She had invited him into her home, her life, her future. The magnitude of it was almost overwhelming. When they arrived at the ranch, Preston unsaddled his horse and turned it into the corral, then gathered his belongings from where he had left them in the barn the previous day. Martha stood on the porch, watching him, and realized she had no idea what happened next. What were the expectations here? They were married, but they barely knew each other. Did he expect to share her bed tonight? The thought made her pulse race with a mixture of fear and something she did not want to examine too closely. Preston seemed to sense her uncertainty because when he climbed the porch steps, he said quietly, I will sleep in the barn for now if that is all right with you. I know this is all very sudden, and I do not want to make you uncomfortable. We can take things slow, get to know each other. The relief that flooded through Martha was almost palpable. Thank you, she said softly. I appreciate that. Of course. Preston set his bedroll down on the porch. Now, I am sure you have work to do, and so do I. How about we just go about our day, and tonight we can have dinner together and talk. Start getting to know each other properly. That sounds like a good plan, Martha agreed. So that was what they did. Martha went about her usual chores, tending the garden and the animals, while Preston worked on repairing the corral fence. Every so often, Martha would glance out and see him working, his shirt sleeves rolled up and sweat gleaming on his face, and she would feel a strange flutter in her stomach. As evening approached, Martha began preparing dinner. She made her best stew with dumplings, biscuits, and dried apple pie. She set the table with care, using the good dishes that she had not used since Samuel died. When she called Preston in for dinner, he washed up at the pump and came to the table with damp hair and clean hands. He looked at the spread she had laid out and smiled. "This looks wonderful. Thank you for going to so much trouble." "It is no trouble," Martha said, though in truth she had spent extra time to make everything just right. "It is our wedding day. That deserves a good meal." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, and then Preston said, "Tell me about the ranch. What are your plans for it?" "What were you and Samuel hoping to build here?" Martha set down her fork and thought about the question. Samuel wanted to breed good quality horses. He thought there was a market for working horses, ones that were smart and steady and well trained. "We had started to build up a small herd before he died, but I had to sell most of them to pay debts." "Horses," Preston said thoughtfully. "That is a good plan. I know horses, worked with them my whole life. We could make that work." "We would need to buy breeding stock," Martha said. "Good mares and a quality stallion. That takes money." "I still have about $500 left from my savings," Preston said. "We could use that to get started. And I know a man down in San Antonio who breeds excellent horses. I could write to him, see what he has available." Martha felt a spark of excitement. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to think about the future instead of just surviving day to day. "That could work, and we could take in horses to train, earn money that way while we are building up the breeding program." They talked for over an hour, sharing ideas and making plans. Martha was surprised by how easy it was to talk to Preston, how he listened to her opinions and treated them with respect. Samuel had loved her, she knew that, but he had also been a man of his time, prone to making decisions without consulting her. Preston seemed different, more willing to view her as a true partner. When they finally ran out of topics and the dishes were cleared, an awkward silence fell. Martha felt the weight of their situation pressing down on her again. They were married, but they were sleeping in separate places. They were partners, but they were still strangers. How did one navigate such a situation? "I should let you get some rest," Preston said, standing. "Thank you for dinner. It was the best meal I have had in years." "You are welcome," Martha said. "And Preston, thank you for today, for all of it. I know this is not a conventional marriage, but I am glad we are doing this together." Preston's smile was soft and genuine. "So am I, Martha, so am I." He left through the kitchen door, heading toward the barn, and Martha stood in the quiet house feeling more alone than she had in a long time. Which was strange, considering she now had a husband. But he was out in the barn and she was in here, and there was a distance between them that had nothing to do with physical space. She got ready for bed and lay in the darkness, thinking about the man who was now her husband. She thought about his green eyes and his gentle voice, the way he had looked at her during the ceremony, the thoughtful gesture of buying rings. She thought about Samuel and the love they had shared, and wondered if it was possible to feel that way about someone again. She thought about her future, and for the first time in a long time, it looked like something other than a bleak struggle for survival. The next morning, Martha woke to the smell of coffee. She dressed quickly and went to the kitchen, where she found Preston at the stove, cooking breakfast. He looked up when she entered, offering a shy smile. "Good morning. I hope you do not mind. I am used to waking early and I thought I would make myself useful." "I do not mind at all," Martha said, surprised and pleased. Samuel had never cooked a meal in his life. "That smells wonderful. They ate breakfast together, and then Preston said, "I am going to ride into town today to send that letter to my contact in San Antonio about the horses. Do you need anything while I am there?" "We need flour and sugar," Martha said, "and coffee. I can give you money." "No need," Preston said. "I still have some funds. Consider it my contribution to the household." He was gone most of the day, and Martha found herself missing his presence more than she expected. The ranch felt emptier without him, even though she had been alone for months. When he finally returned in the late afternoon, she found herself smiling without meaning to. "How was town?" she asked. "Fine. I sent the letter and picked up supplies, and I bought something for you." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Martha opened it carefully and found a beautiful embroidered shawl in shades of blue and green. She looked up at Preston in surprise. "This is beautiful. You did not have to do this." "I wanted to," Preston said. "You have been living so frugally, working so hard. I thought you deserved something nice." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had given her a gift, had thought about what might make her happy. "Thank you," she whispered. "I love it." Over the following days and weeks, they fell into a routine. Preston worked on repairing and improving the ranch, tackling projects that had been beyond Martha's strength or skill. He fixed the barn roof, shored up the corral fence, repaired the pump at the well, and built a new chicken coop. Martha kept the house, tended the garden, and handled the cooking and cleaning. In the evenings, they would eat dinner together and talk, sharing stories about their pasts and dreams for the future. Slowly, cautiously, they began to know each other. Martha learned that Preston loved music, but could not carry a tune to save his life. That he was meticulous about caring for his horse and his tools. That he had a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughter at unexpected moments. That he was patient and steady and reliable in ways that made her feel safe. Preston learned that Martha was stronger than she looked, both physically and emotionally. That she had a green thumb and could make anything grow. That she loved to read and had a small collection of books that she treasured. That she sang while she worked, unconsciously, in a clear, pretty voice. That underneath her cautious exterior was a warm, passionate woman who had been hurt and was slowly learning to trust again. About a month after their wedding, the response came from Preston's contact in San Antonio. He had 3 quality mares and a young stallion available at a good price. Preston and Martha sat at the kitchen table and went over their finances, calculating whether they could afford it. "It is a risk," Martha said, chewing her lower lip. "If we spend this money and something goes wrong, we will have nothing left. But if we do not take the risk, we will never build anything beyond bare survival," Preston countered. "I believe in this plan, Martha. I believe we can make it work." Martha looked at him across the table, at his earnest face and steady eyes, and made a decision. "All right, let's do it." Preston's smile was brilliant. "You will not regret this, I promise." He left the next week to travel to San Antonio to purchase the horses. He was gone for nearly 2 weeks, and Martha found that she missed him terribly. The ranch felt wrong without him, empty and quiet in ways that made her chest ache. She realized with a start that sometime in the past month, Preston had become more than just her business partner or the man who had saved her land. He had become her friend, someone she cared about and wanted to have around. When he finally returned, leading 4 beautiful horses, Martha ran out to meet him without thinking. She stopped short just before reaching him, suddenly self-conscious about her enthusiasm, but Preston was grinning at her in a way that made her heart skip. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing to the horses. "Are they not beauties?" "They are magnificent," Martha breathed, approaching the nearest mare and running her hand along the horse's sleek neck. "You did well." "Wait until you see the stallion," Preston said. "He has the best bloodlines I have seen in years. Our foals are going to be extraordinary." They spent the rest of the day getting the horses settled, and that evening they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset and feeling like they had accomplished something important. Martha found herself acutely aware of Preston's presence beside her, of the warmth of his body and the sound of his breathing. When his hand brushed against hers, she did not pull away. "Martha," Preston said quietly, and something in his tone made her look at him. "I know we agreed to take things slow, and I have been trying to give you space. But I need you to know that it has become more than just a business arrangement for me. I care about you, more than I expected to." Martha's heart was pounding. "I care about you too," she admitted softly. "I did not think I could feel this way again after Samuel. But Preston, you have been so kind, so patient. You make me feel safe and valued and seen. I'm not sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, you became important to me." Preston reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I would like to court you properly. I know we are already married, which makes it a bit backward, but I want to do this right. I want to earn your love, not just assume I have it because of a piece of paper." Martha felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I would like that," she whispered. And so they began a strange, old-fashioned courtship despite being man and wife. Preston would pick wildflowers and leave them on the kitchen table for Martha to find. He would sit with her in the evenings and read aloud from her favorite books. He taught her to play simple songs on a harmonica he had purchased in town. They would take walks together in the cool of the evening, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, about 2 months after their wedding, they were sitting on the porch watching the stars come out. Preston had his arm around Martha's shoulders, and she was leaning against him, feeling more content than she had in years. The horses were settled in the pasture, the ranch was finally starting to look prosperous again, and she had a partner who made her laugh and feel cherished. "Martha," Preston said softly, "may I kiss you? Really kiss you, I mean. Not like at the wedding." Martha's pulse quickened, but it was not fear she felt. It was anticipation. "Yes," she breathed. Preston cupped her face gently in his hands and leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. But Martha did not want to pull away. When his lips met hers, soft and warm and seeking, she sighed and leaned into the kiss. It was nothing like the chaste kiss they had shared at their wedding. This was deep and passionate and full of all the feelings they had been carefully building between them over the past months. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I love you," Preston said, his forehead resting against hers. "I know it might be too soon and I am not expecting you to say it back, but I needed you to know. I love you, Martha. I think I started falling in love with you that first day, when you stood on that porch looking so brave and stubborn and determined not to give up." Martha felt tears stream down her face, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for weeks now, but I was afraid to admit it. Afraid it was too soon, afraid I was betraying Samuel's memory. But Preston, you are not a replacement for what I lost. You are something new, something precious in your own right. I love you." They kissed again, and this time when Preston stood and offered her his hand, Martha took it and led him inside, to the bedroom she had been occupying alone since their wedding. They crossed the threshold together, and Martha finally felt like they were truly married in every sense of the word. The seasons changed, and the ranch prospered. The mares foaled in the spring, producing 3 healthy colts that Preston proclaimed were going to be champions. Word spread about the quality of their breeding stock, and people began coming from surrounding counties to buy horses or arrange breeding services. Money started coming in steadily, enough that they could make improvements and start saving for the future. Martha bloomed under Preston's love and care. The lines of stress and worry that had etched themselves into her face began to fade. She laughed more, smiled more, and allowed herself to be happy. Preston was everything she could have asked for in a husband, attentive and affectionate and devoted. He never made her feel like she was just fulfilling a role. He made her feel loved. One evening in late fall, nearly a year after their wedding, Martha was cleaning up after dinner when she felt Preston's arms come around her waist from behind. He nuzzled her neck, making her shiver in the way he knew she liked. "I have been thinking," he murmured against her skin. "That is always dangerous," Martha teased. "I have been thinking that this ranch needs a name. Something proper, something that reflects who we are and what we have built together." Martha turned in his arms to face him. "What did you have in mind?" "The Hunt Everett Ranch," Preston said. "Your name and mine together, equal partners in everything." Martha felt her eyes prick with tears again. Even after all this time, Preston still found ways to surprise her with his thoughtfulness. "I love it. The Hunt Everett Ranch it is." "There is something else," Preston said, looking suddenly nervous in a way she rarely saw from him. "I know we have not talked about it, but I would like to have children someday. A family. If you want that too." Martha had been thinking about the same thing lately. She was 25 now, and the idea of having children no longer filled her with the anxiety it once had. She felt ready, felt like their life was stable enough and their marriage strong enough to bring children into the world. "I want that too," she said softly. "I think I would like that very much." Preston's smile was radiant. He picked her up and spun her around, making her laugh. "We are going to have such a good life, Martha. I promise you, the best life." And he was right. Their life together was good, better than Martha could have imagined that desperate day when she stood on the porch holding a foreclosure notice. They worked hard, certainly. Running a ranch was never easy. But they worked together, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating successes as a team. By the following spring, Martha discovered she was expecting their first child. Preston was overjoyed, fussing over her and trying to keep her from doing any heavy work. Martha tolerated his hovering with good-natured patience, amused by how protective he had become. Their son was born in early January of 1880, a healthy baby boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's brown hair. They named him Samuel Preston Hunt, honoring both the man Martha had lost and the man who had saved her. Preston cried when he held his son for the first time, and Martha fell even more deeply in love with her husband watching him cradle their baby with such tenderness. Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. Preston would work during the day, but he insisted on being present in the evenings to help with Samuel. He would walk the floor with the baby when he was fussy, change diapers without complaint, and sing terrible off-key lullabies that somehow still soothed their son to sleep. Sarah Whitman came to visit often, delighted to play with baby Samuel and exclaiming over how well Martha looked. "You are glowing," she said one afternoon as they sat on the porch watching Preston work with one of the horses. "Marriage clearly agrees with you." "It does," Martha agreed, unable to keep the smile off her face. "I am happy, Sarah, truly happy. I never thought I would be able to say that again after Samuel died, but Preston has given me a whole new life." "He is a good man," Sarah observed. "You were lucky to find each other." "We were," Martha agreed, thinking about that first day when Preston had ridden up to her porch with his improbable proposal. It had seemed insane at the time, marrying a stranger to save her land. But it had turned out to be the best decision she had ever made. As little Samuel grew, the ranch continued to thrive. The Hunt Everett Ranch became known throughout the region for producing quality horses. Preston and Martha made a formidable team, with Preston handling the training and sales while Martha managed the books and the day-to-day operations. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men who were respectful and hardworking. When Samuel was 2 years old, Martha gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose Marie. She had her mother's hazel eyes and her father's dark hair, and Preston declared her the most beautiful baby ever born. Martha laughed at his bias but secretly agreed. On quiet evenings after the children were asleep, Preston and Martha would sit together on the porch as they had done since the beginning. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, but always they were together. Preston would hold Martha's hand or put his arm around her shoulders, and she would lean into him, feeling safe and loved and profoundly grateful for the life they had built. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked one evening. "Marrying me that day, taking such a huge risk on a stranger?" Martha looked up at him in surprise. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything, Preston. You saved my land, yes, but more than that, you gave me hope when I had none. You gave me love when I thought I would never love again. You gave me a family and a future." "How could I regret any of that?" Preston smiled and pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I am the lucky one," he said softly. "I was just a drifter with no place to call home. You gave me roots, Martha. You gave me purpose and meaning. You gave me love. I thank God every day that I decided to ride up to your porch that afternoon." "It was fate," Martha said. "It had to be. What are the odds that you would show up at exactly the right moment, with exactly what I needed, and turn out to be exactly the man I did not know I was looking for?" "I do not know about fate," Preston said, "but I know that I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me." "You already have," Martha assured him. "Every single day you make me glad I married you." They sat together as the sun set, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. In the distance, they could hear the horses moving in the pasture, and from inside the house came the soft sounds of their children sleeping. It was a peaceful scene, a far cry from the desperate circumstances that had brought them together. Martha thought about the woman she had been that day when Preston first rode up, frightened and alone and on the verge of losing everything. That woman had been brave but broken, determined but desperate. She barely recognized herself in that person anymore. Preston's love had healed her in ways she had not even known she needed healing. "I love you," she said, turning to look at her husband. "I do not say it enough, but I love you more than I can express. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Preston's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I love you too, Martha, more than life itself." They kissed as the stars began to appear overhead, 2 people who had started as strangers and had become everything to each other. Their story was not conventional, and it had not been easy, but it was theirs, and it was beautiful. The years continued to pass in a blur of happiness and hard work. Samuel grew into a sturdy, cheerful boy who loved horses as much as his father did. Rose was bright and curious, always asking questions and getting into mischief. When she was 4, Martha gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Thomas. He had his father's green eyes and easy smile, and he completed their family perfectly. The Hunt Everett Ranch became one of the most successful horse breeding operations in that part of Texas. People came from as far away as Oklahoma and Louisiana to buy their horses. Preston and Martha reinvested their profits into the land, buying more acreage and better breeding stock. They built a new barn and a larger house, one with enough room for their growing family and visiting guests. Martha's earlier fears about betraying Samuel's memory faded completely over time. She came to understand that loving Preston did not diminish what she had shared with her first husband. They were different loves, both valid and real in their own ways. Samuel would always hold a place in her heart as her first love, but Preston was her forever love, the man she was meant to grow old with. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Martha with a trip to San Antonio. They left the children with Sarah Whitman and spent 3 days in the city, eating in restaurants, going to the theater, and simply enjoying being together without the responsibilities of the ranch. On their last evening, Preston took Martha to a jewelry store and insisted on buying her a new wedding ring to replace the simple gold band he had purchased in haste all those years ago. "You deserve something beautiful," he said, sliding an elegant ring with a small diamond onto her finger. "Something that shows how much you mean to me." Martha looked at the ring, then at her husband, and felt tears stream down her face. "I do not need a fancy ring to know how much you love me. You show me every day in 1,000 little ways, but thank you. I will treasure it always." That night, in their hotel room, they made love with the passion and tenderness that came from a decade of knowing each other's bodies and hearts. Afterward, lying in Preston's arms, Martha reflected on how far they had come from that awkward first night as newlyweds sleeping in separate buildings. Now they could not imagine sleeping apart, even for a single night. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked, running his fingers through her hair. "About us," Martha said. "About how strange it is that something that started so unconventionally turned into something so perfect. We have beaten the odds, Preston. We have built something real and lasting." "We have," Preston agreed, "and we are going to keep building it for the rest of our lives." They returned home to find that the children had been perfect angels for Sarah, though Martha suspected her friend was exaggerating to be kind. Life returned to its normal rhythm, full of the controlled chaos that came with raising 3 active children while running a successful ranch. Samuel, now 10 years old, was already showing signs of becoming an excellent horseman. Preston spent hours with him in the corral, teaching him everything he knew about training and caring for horses. Rose, at 8, was more interested in the business side of things. She would sit with Martha and help her with the ledgers, asking questions about numbers and profit margins that made both her parents laugh. Thomas, at 6, was still young enough that his main interests were playing and getting dirty, but he showed promise of being as capable as his siblings. As the children grew, so did the ranch. By the time Samuel was 15, the Hunt Everett ranch employed 10 full-time workers and covered over 1,000 acres. They had expanded into cattle ranching as well, though horses remained their primary focus. Preston and Martha had become respected members of the community, known for their fair dealings and quality stock. Martha sometimes thought about that desperate day when she had stood on the porch holding a foreclosure notice, feeling like her world was ending. She wished she could go back and tell that frightened young woman that everything was going to be all right, that a stranger with kind eyes would ride up and offer her salvation, that she would fall in love again and build a life beyond her wildest dreams. But she could not go back, and perhaps that was for the best. The struggles she had endured had made her stronger, had taught her that she was more resilient than she knew, and meeting Preston when she was at her lowest point had made her appreciate him all the more. She had never taken their happiness for granted, not for a single day. On a warm spring evening when Martha was 43 and Preston was 46, they sat on the porch together as they had done countless times over the years. Their children were grown now, Samuel newly married and helping run the ranch, Rose engaged to a fine young man from a neighboring county, and Thomas away at school studying animal husbandry. The house was quiet, almost too quiet after years of noise and activity. "It is strange having them all grown up," Martha said, leaning her head on Preston's shoulder. I miss the chaos sometimes." "I do too," Preston admitted. "But we did a good job with them, Martha. They are good people, all three of them. We should be proud." "I am proud," Martha said. "Of them and of us. Look at what we built, Preston. Look at this life we created from nothing." Preston looked out over the ranch, at the neat fences and well-maintained buildings, at the horses grazing peacefully in the pasture. "We did do well, did we not? And we are not done yet. We still have years ahead of us." "Years to spend together," Martha said softly. "That is all I have ever wanted. More time with you." Preston turned to face her, and even after more than 20 years of marriage, the love in his eyes still made her heart skip. "You are going to have me for a very long time, Mrs. Hunt. I plan to grow old and gray with you." "You are already gray," Martha teased, touching the silver in his dark hair. "So are you," Preston retorted, tugging gently on a strand of her hair that had turned silver years ago. They laughed together, the easy laughter of two people who knew each other completely and loved each other without reservation. Then Preston grew serious. "I have never told you this, but that day I rode up to your ranch I was lost," he said quietly. "I had been drifting for years, working one job after another, never feeling like I belonged anywhere. I was starting to think I would never find a place to call home. And then I saw you standing on that porch, and something in me just knew. I knew that if I could just get you to give me a chance, I had found what I had been searching for." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. After all these years, Preston could still move her with his words. "I am so glad you stopped that day. I am so glad you had the courage to make such an outrageous proposal to a desperate woman. You saved me, Preston, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Preston corrected gently. "I was just as lost as you were, just in a different way. We found each other at exactly the right moment, and we built this beautiful life together. That is the real miracle." As the sun set on another perfect day, Martha and Preston sat together in the peace and quiet, holding hands and watching the land they had fought so hard to keep. Their story had started with an impossible question, a leap of faith that should not have worked but somehow did. And from that shaky beginning, they had built something strong and lasting, a love that had weathered every storm and grown deeper with each passing year. Samuel and his new wife moved into the small house Preston, and Martha had built on the far side of the property. And within a year, Martha and Preston became grandparents for the first time. Holding her first grandchild, a baby boy with his grandfather's green eyes, Martha felt like her life had come full circle. She had known such loss and such love, such despair and such joy. And through it all, Preston had been by her side, steady and true. Rose married the following spring in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Trinity, the same church where Martha and Preston had wed all those years ago. As Martha watched her daughter exchange vows with her chosen partner, she caught Preston's eye across the church. He smiled at her, and she smiled back, both of them remembering their own wedding day and how far they had come since then. Thomas returned from school with a degree and new ideas for improving their breeding program. Preston welcomed his input, and father and son worked together to take the ranch to new heights of success. Martha watched them with pride, grateful that they had been able to give their children opportunities and stability, things both she and Preston had lacked in their own youths. As they entered their 60s, Preston and Martha gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, turning over more responsibility to their children. They still kept busy, of course. Preston could not resist working with the horses, and Martha loved tending her ever-expanding garden. But they also had more time to simply be together, to enjoy the fruits of their labor. They took walks in the evening, hand in hand like newlyweds. They sat on the porch for hours, talking or reading or just watching the world go by. They visited their children and played with their grandchildren, eventually ending up with 6 grandchildren who called them Nana and Papa and thought they hung the moon. One evening, when they were both 67 years old and had been married for more than 40 years, Martha and Preston sat on their porch watching yet another sunset. They were gray-haired now, with wrinkles earned through years of laughter and hard work. But they still held hands, still looked at each other with love, still chose to spend every possible moment together. "You remember the question I asked you that first day?" Preston said suddenly. "After I offered to pay your debt," Martha smiled. "You asked me to marry you. How could I forget?" "No, before that," Preston said. "When you said you would lose the land in 3 days, I asked you what you would do if someone paid your debt. Do you remember what you said?" Martha thought back to that day, trying to recall the exact words. "I do not remember precisely. I think I said something about not knowing why anyone would do such a thing." Preston chuckled. "You did. But what I meant by that question was not what would you do with the land. I was asking what you would do with your life if you had a second chance. If you could start over without the crushing weight of debt and fear. That was what I really wanted to know." Martha looked at her husband with tears in her eyes. "And what would your answer have been if someone had asked you that question that day? What were you going to do with your life?" "I was going to love you," Preston said simply. "From the moment I saw you, I knew. I was going to spend the rest of my life loving you and building a life with you. That was my answer then, and it is my answer now." Martha leaned over and kissed him, a soft, tender kiss that held all the love and gratitude of 4 decades together. "That was my answer too," she whispered. "I just did not know it until I got to know you. But loving you, building this life with you, raising our children together, growing old together, that has been the answer to every question I did not even know to ask." They sat together as the stars came out, 2 people who had started as desperate strangers and had become each other's everything. Their love story had not started conventionally, but it had become the kind of epic romance that people dreamed about. Built on respect and partnership, deepened by shared struggles and triumphs, tested by time and found unbreakable. The Hunt Everett Ranch continued to thrive for generations, a testament to what 2 people could build when they worked together with love and determination. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that Martha and Preston had learned long ago. Sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes a stranger can become the answer to prayers you did not even know you were praying. Martha and Preston lived long, happy lives, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all knew the story of how Nana and Papa had met. How Papa had ridden up to Nana's ranch on the day she was about to lose everything. How he had paid her debt and asked her to marry him, a stranger to a stranger. How they had fallen in love slowly and built an empire together. How their love had lasted through decades and had become the foundation on which a whole family was built. When Preston Hunt finally passed away at the age of 84, surrounded by his family, Martha held his hand and whispered that she would see him soon. She followed him just 6 months later, unable to bear being without her partner for long. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had loved, under a marker that read, "Preston and Martha Hunt, partners in life, partners in love, partners forever." Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren continued to run the Hunt Everett Ranch, keeping alive the legacy of the widow who refused to give up and the cowboy who had saved her with a single question. And every generation was told the story of how love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, how faith and courage could change everything, and how 2 people who should have been strangers became soulmates instead. In the end, what started as a desperate business arrangement became one of the greatest love stories ever told in Trinity, Texas. A reminder that sometimes, when everything seems lost, salvation can ride up on a dusty horse wearing a cowboy hat, carrying not just money but hope, not just a solution but a future filled with love. And that is exactly what happened on that hot August day in 1878 when Preston Hunt rode up to Martha Everett's ranch and asked her one simple question that changed both their lives forever. Would she take a chance on a stranger? Would she risk her heart one more time? Would she let him help her save her land and maybe, just maybe, build something beautiful together? She had said yes, and it had made all the difference.